All right. So welcome, everyone. My name is Amanda Miller. I'm the Associate Director for the National Consortium for Data Science. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our webinar today, hosted by Interpersonal Frequency, The Data Shows. Government website accessibility and usability go hand in hand. This is the time to grab your breakfast or your lunch and your beverage of choice, shut the door, and get ready to learn from our friends at Interpersonal Frequency about how to make all of those spaces on your agency or municipal website open, accessible, and most importantly, useful. NCDS is eager to learn more about where needs exist, and we seek to provide paths to increase data literacy and digital inclusion by offering websites like the one you're at today and through other online learning opportunities. Next Tuesday, we're going to be hosting another free event entitled The Good, the Bad, and the Biased: 5 Ways that Data Visualizations Can Mislead and How to Fix Them, from a computer science professor here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. This March, we're also launching a mini version of our popular August short course series, Data Matters. And you can find more information about that at datamatters.org. And we're going to be dropping links in the chat so you can learn a little bit more about those events and also get registered. But just to focus back on our series today, Kirsty, Carrie Ann, and Melanie will share the biggest lessons data has taught Interpersonal Frequency about the impact of accessibility and usability in terms of government websites. Before we begin, we do have just a couple of quick housekeeping items for today's webinar. Around 12:45, we will share our Q&A platform along with instructions in the Zoom chat and on the screen, so you can ask questions, because right now participants can only chat with the host and co-host. So we'll provide that platform for you to type in your questions. And if we don't get to your question or comment during our live session today, we will do our best to address that in our wrap-up materials. And you can also reach out to the presenters directly as well. So another reminder, for those of you who have attended these events so far this year, after we complete our Q&A, we will ask you to complete a webinar evaluation, and we'll post another link in the chat to register for our upcoming short course series via datamatters.org. And with that in mind, I don't want to delay any further. Eager to hear from Melanie, Carrie Ann, and Kirsty. You guys ready to go?
Let's do it.
All right.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks so much.
Wonderful introduction, as always. We are very happy to be here today, and we have packed a lot in here. When you start to present on a thing you're passionate about, the hard part is how do we make it fit, right? So hopefully that passion will come through, but also we'll have time to cover everything that we laid out. So just a very brief reintroduction here. I'm Kirsty Kenneth. I'm the User Experience Manager at Interpersonal Frequency, and I'm very excited to be here today with 2 of the colleagues I work with every day, Carrie Ann Tuckley, our Information Architect, and Melanie Bazzelli, Content Strategist. As a team, UX, that means user experience, we are passionate about innovating digital government, finding new ways to do things that you thought had to be done in that clunky old bureaucratic way. We're really interested in how we turn data into action. I talked a lot about that in the second webinar. If you happened to join us last time, how do we take these insights and nuggets and turn it into ways we can start making real improvements? And overall, we're here looking to create experiences that are engaging, effective, gosh darn it, maybe even enjoyable for users who, again, have to interact with these sites, have to do these essential tasks. How do we make the best of it? So let me lay out what we're going to do in today's webinar. First, I'm going to really quickly, one slide, recap what you missed in webinars 1 and 2. You're not really missing any context, but there are a couple key points I want to bring out because it's going to show you how we try to kind of close the loop with everything that we're covering here today. Then Melanie and Carrie Ann are going to help me give you a very practical introduction to digital accessibility and usability. So if you're not sure what these terms mean, or you're a little rusty, or you're just curious what are the latest best practices, they're going to lay that out for you. Then we're going to show you how we connect our voice of citizen data and the platform we get there to usability, to accessibility, and start using those as ways to slice into that data and start looking for improvement on these sites. We'll give you a couple examples of what that actually looks like when we dig deeper and start to investigate these areas of interest. And last but not least, we want to really bring things home by connecting the big dots: usability, accessibility, and inclusivity, because ultimately we're here about raising the bar for everyone and creating a better experience for everyone who has to interact with these sites. Then we'll do our Q&A. And as Amanda said, if there's stuff we don't get to, we'll have the follow-up documentation and ability to continue the conversation. All right, so really quickly, what did you miss? If you weren't here, or if you were here and can't remember, what did we cover in session 1 and 2? Session 1 was presented by our CEO and lead data scientist, Harish Rao, and he talked about how looking at these sort of hidden cues that we get from the data suggests that there are some things we could be doing to improve digital inclusivity on local government sites. And we're going to talk to this main point. Let's just face it, right now, they are failing to give their users an easy and effective experience, which creates questions about how we ever can create outreach and bring new folks onto these platforms and serve those who are underserved currently. In session 2, I picked that up using the particular lens of content to talk about how your site can't succeed if the content is not good and not supporting that user experience. But that can be a good thing because it's a great entry point for creating improvements for the user experience that are very cost effective, that are very immediate. So I talked about the importance of thinking about content in a municipal lens as being useful, accessible, and alive, and the sort of grounding point for that approach. Today, we're going to sort of go broad again and bring in these other practices of accessibility and usability and how they also shape the work we do. So I am going to hand things to Melanie, who's going to talk about what digital accessibility really means.
Thank you, Kirsty. Okay, so what is digital accessibility? Who's it for? It's for everybody. How do you measure it? Well, we've got a lot of tools and interpersonal frequency that we use to measure it, and you can use standard measurement tools out there as well to kind of suss out some of these details. And what are the benefits of digital accessibility? Benefits everyone, circling back to everyone. So on average, maybe 1 out of every 4 or 5 people these days has some kind of disability that might affect them when they're trying to visit your website. So if you can make your website inclusive and accessible for all, you are broadening the audience that you can serve. And I have this link here for the WebAIM study. It's called the WebAIM Million. They look at 1 million of the top home pages every year, and they examine those against the WCAG 2 standard. WCAG, WCAG, is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are produced by the Worldwide Web Consortium, or W3, and they are sort of the backbone of the guidelines we have for how to make your site more accessible. So in 2022, 96.8% of these 1 million homepages that they audited were failing at various things. So plenty of room for improvement, but actually it used to be like 98+%. So it's actually improving, but there's still a lot of work to be done. So when you're thinking about digital accessibility for your audiences, you just want them to be able to come to your site, your app, your content, and easily navigate and understand it. Broadest range of users possible. As people, we are unique, we're all different. And again, disabilities can occur that might impact somebody's experience. So you just want to be thoughtful in planning for those. How are you going to accommodate people? So we have the core principles, POUR. Accessible content needs to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. 4. So perceivable. Your content needs to be available to the basic human senses, especially when you're interacting with digital content. So hearing and vision primarily, touch sometimes, and now we're seeing voice interactions as well. Keep in mind that people might use browsers or assistive technology to navigate your site. And there's an image here, which is a wonderful image produced by Microsoft about inclusive design. And this particular chart shows that disabilities, there are actually 3 different kinds of disabilities. You have permanent, temporary, and situational. And then the left-hand side of this image describes touch, see, hear, and speak. Missing is cognitive. So that's another one to keep in consideration. But for example, a permanent touch type of disability would be you're an amputee, you have 1 arm. A temporary situation would be you have an arm injury, your arm's in a cast. Situational could be that you only have 1 arm because you've got a cute little baby in the other, or a bunch of bags of groceries, that kind of thing. For vision, permanent, you could be blind. Temporary, you might have cataracts, and a situational one is a distracted driver. You're trying to do a few too many things behind the wheel there. For hearing, you could be deaf as a permanent disability. You might have an ear infection as a temporary one. Situational, you're in a crowded, noisy bar, bartender can't hear you place your order because there's so much background noise. And then with speech, you might be nonverbal. You could perhaps have laryngitis. You've lost your voice there for a day, or you might have a heavy accent. So those are some of the various types of disabilities to keep in mind. Operable, your audience needs to be able to use your site, your app, and be able to access all of the controls and interactive elements. So people might be interacting with your content using a mouse. They could be using a keyboard. They might be using assistive technology. So you need to be able to accommodate all of these different ways they are going to interact with your content. Understandable. So as a content strategist, I love this one because this is your content over which you have a great deal of control. And your content needs to be clear and easy to understand. Robust, that's our last one, and that's technology. So technology is always changing. There's always a new algorithm. The platform changes the rules of how they do things on any given day. So regardless of device, regardless of all the technologies that might be used, including new and older versions, people need to be able to access your content. So plan for that. Know that there's going to be a lot of diversity in tools and technologies, old and new, for people visiting your site, and keep that in mind. Now I'm going to turn it to Carrie Ann.
Well, thanks so much, Melanie. And as the title of our webinar states, accessibility and usability really do go hand in hand. Digital usability aims to ensure that users are able to navigate their websites and applications easily, find the information they're looking for, or complete the tasks that they came to accomplish. That may sound very similar to accessibility in the way that Melanie just described it, but it's a bit different in that it's concerned with creating the easy experience once you've accessed the site. So accessibility is more about being able to get to that site and understand that site. Usability is being able to use the site to accomplish the tasks that you've come there to accomplish. And we use a fun little acronym for remembering usability, which is MEALS, which is particularly relevant right now, since I'm sure most of you are either enjoying your breakfast or your lunch while we're doing this webinar. And MEALS stands for memorability, efficiency, errors, learnability, and satisfaction. And we'll touch on each of these coming up here. Memorability. Can users remember how to perform key tasks? So this is different. We'll touch on learnability a bit later, but memorability is being able to complete those tasks when you come back once you've learned it once. So not having to relearn those tasks each time. An example that we see frequently in our work is after I've set up my account to pay a water bill, can I do it again the next time without much struggle? Can I come next month after I haven't looked at it for a while and be able to pay my water bill easily because you've set it up for me? A good way to achieve that is to break those tasks down into smaller steps, describe those steps in short, easy to understand terms. The next one is efficiency. How quickly can users perform those key tasks? So one way to accomplish that is minimize load times on your site and process times as well. And do your best to minimize the number of steps that are required to complete that task. The next one is errors. Seems simple and seems pretty straightforward that you wouldn't want your system to error out, but you also want to minimize errors on the part of your users. And there are a lot of ways that that can happen and things that you can do to minimize that. Minimizing user input errors, for example, by providing field formats, for example, for phone numbers. This is a pet peeve of mine when I'm filling out a form, if they don't tell me what format they want the phone number in, and then they give me an error that I didn't put the phone number in the format that they wanted, even though they didn't tell me what that was. In forms, also clearly marking those fields that are required in order to complete that task. So if they want to skip over some of those fields that aren't required, they can do so, and it's easy and quick for them to do. And then on the end of your technology, as soon as you know that those systems are down or that something is broken, post an alert so that people are aware and they're not spending their time erroring and getting those error messages, so that they can come back at a later time and minimize that opportunity for error. The next one is learnability. So a little bit different from that memorability in that this is how easily can users learn to perform those key tasks. When they come to the site to set up that water bill for the first time and to pay that water bill for the first time, how easy is it for them to learn to do that? Some ways that we can do that on our sites is consider using tooltips. Icons, tooltips are the icons that show help text when you click or hover. To explain concepts that might be difficult or that might be unfamiliar. And for more difficult tasks that can't be streamlined, consider using video tutorials just to show people quickly and easily how to complete these tasks on your site. And our last one in the MEAL acronym is satisfaction. Do users have a sense of satisfaction when they complete a task? And you know, Kirsty and I were discussing this yesterday, and she called it the je ne sais quoi. This is the piece that's a little bit harder to get to. But do users have a sense of satisfaction when you complete the task? Is the experience as a whole satisfying? We know they're not going to love paying their water bill. Nobody loves going and paying their water bill, but are they going to go there and know that they've completed the task that they have to do and they don't have a choice in the matter to the best of their ability in the quickest way possible and the easiest way possible without a struggle, without having to call someone, without having to come back 5 times, without having to go and pick up different pieces of paper because they didn't have the information that they needed on hand. So were they able to complete it to their expectations? Was it relatively easy? Was it relatively quick? And was it error-free? With that, I'm going to pass it back to Kirsty. Oh, you're muted, Kirsty.
Rookie mistakes. I think in under 15 minutes, you just got an intro to digital accessibility and usability. Obviously, you could also expand that into a full course. There's much more that you can talk about each of those principles and dig deeper, but we wanted to kind of just set the table, give you the basics, give you that background, so we can talk about how we start connecting those practices and those goals to the data that we have as we're sort of on this quest to improve the overall user experience. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to connect accessibility and usability to our favorite metric, user success. So I'll talk about that in just a second here in case you didn't join us last time. As many of you may know, at Interpersonal Frequency, we have a proprietary analytics platform called Voice of Citizen, and it's a combination front-end, back-end set of data that we're getting. So we're getting a user-facing survey where they self-report, were they able to complete their purpose of visit, how satisfied were they with their overall experience with the site. They can self-report why they weren't, if they had issues. In the second webinar, we talked a lot about how those failure statements contain a lot of clues about where we may be missing the mark on these sites. And then we're also tracking the back end. So clickstream, how long they're spending on various pages, where they are when they're reporting these failures. If they say, I can't pay my water bill, and we realize they're actually over in the solid waste department rather than the water services department, then we know we might have information architecture issues going on that are leading people down the wrong path, things like that. So it's a huge amount of data. As Harish and I mentioned, we have over 17 million people on these platforms. It's a huge body of data, and we're always looking for ways to sort of slice and dice it that are going to tell us more about how we can move the needle, how we can improve these sites, which have an immediate impact on so many people. When we cut to the chase, the news is not great. Harish shared this information with you. I have shared this information with you. But if you're new here today, yeah, it hurts a little bit. The average municipal website grade, if we go with the old traditional grading scale, is an F. We are seeing roughly a 59% user success rate. So that means fewer than 2 out of 3 people who come to visit this site are able to do what they came there to do. Now, this is self-reported data. There are a lot of things we want to dig deeper on this number, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But if we take this as just sort of an overall benchmark, it shows we can do better. And it rings true, right? If you've ever been on a government website, this maybe is not a surprise to you. There are things that feel antiquated. There are things that feel convoluted. There are things that feel like they expect you to understand their complex organizational structure just to do a simple task. So we know we're working with some existing frustrations, some existing issues here. And our question is, how do we start from this user success metric and start to get some answers and some momentum to actually improving it? So one of the ways that we dig a little deeper into that 59% number, one of the ways we like to sort of split it out, is to look at what type of task people came to the site to do. So what I mean specifically is, was it informational? I'm just here to get some information, and it's sort of more of a passive visit to the site, versus transactional. I came here because I need to submit a permit application or pay an invoice, something where I'm interacting with the site in a more complex way. Sometimes it involves additional platforms, multiple steps, and then the hybrid tasks that we consider those where there's usually a little bit of each. I need to get a little bit of information in order to do the task. It's probably not surprising just from a gut check level that this is how those tasks stack up. You can see we have informational tasks with a 64% success rate, transactional tasks at 49%, and hybrid tasks at 59%. Transactional tasks are more complex. It's perhaps not surprising that this is the case. And what's interesting too is that this is a pattern that's mostly held over time. So with a few minor little blips that you can see here, those transactional tasks are always lagging behind the informational or hybrid tasks. Kind of makes sense too, because if we think about how we often engage with the web, it's easier to just skim along and read something than to actually have to tap and touch or type and interact with the site. So more variables are coming in that make it easier to sort of miss the mark. What I want to talk about now is how we take this particular graph and this particular discrepancy between these 3 types of tasks and look at them from that accessibility perspective and that usability perspective. So when we see, these aren't the same, what do we think about from those particular lessons and disciplines so that we can start maybe making some progress? So first I'm going to hand it to Melanie, who's going to talk about accessibility issues that come to mind when we're looking at the discrepancies between informational, transactional, and hybrid success rates.
Thanks, Kirsty. Yeah, I just wanted to touch on some of these, again, when we're trying to delve deeper into how can we improve the situation. So with transactional, you're there to complete a task. So looking at this through the accessibility lens, why is this not performing well? You can look at things like complex steps to task completion. If something is super complicated and difficult to do, then those that are using assistive tech, who have a cognitive impairment of some type, they could be struggling with it. So can you simplify the number of steps perhaps that are needed? Another way to solve for that would be, if you do have complicated forms or lengthy processes, can people save their work and come back to it later? So that would be something else to have a think about. Tasks or interactions are not in a logical order. So I see this a lot with systems. So the system looks great if you're using a mouse and clicking your way cheerfully through it. However, when you start using a keyboard only, that tab is jumping all over the place. And that is just how it's been assembled or coded. It can be solved, it can be fixed, but if somebody's trying to work their way through something and they're using a keyboard and can't do it because everything is out of order, that confuses it further. Another one that's pretty common these days on transactions is timed interaction. So two-factor authentication, you go and you want to do something. They send a code to your phone. Then you have X amount of time to go back to the website to enter that code. I have seen some that are like, you've got a minute, you've got 2 minutes. Well, again, depending on my particular disability at any given moment, 1 out of 4 or 5 people visiting your site might have something going on that day where they're going to be challenged. Then they can't do it in that amount of time. They need more time. So what happens? Right? They may not be able to complete that task if your time limits are too intense. Around informational content, the content just might be inaccessible to assistive technology. So I have seen where I'm using a screen reader, and again, because of how the things are coded, my screen reader misses a certain block of content that might be pretty important instructions. The content is not written in a plain, clear, easy to understand language. Maybe it's not available in the language that I'm most comfortable reading and working in. And a simple thing that's also very common is, the content just lacks description. There's links that say click here. So I see commonly pages that are full of great resources, but all the links say click here. If I'm using a screen reader, my screen reader will say click here, click here, click here as it navigates down the page. So again, it's not helping me discern, where is this link going to go? What is this content that I'm going to encounter? Over to Carrie.
Thanks, Melanie. And then the usability issues with the transactional and informational, and in these slides, I kind of imply hybrid, because if you fix the transactional and the informational, the hybrid will also by default be fixed. So the transactional tasks, some of the usability issues are, as Melanie stated, but a little bit differently, that they have a complex structure and set of steps to accomplish in order to be completed. So ways that we kind of can avoid that is by setting up a step-by-step process and being very succinct and very clear about what steps you will need to take to complete this process, so people can scan it very quickly and see how long this is going to take them, what they need to do. And also, again, with the transactional, they often lead to external sites that require pieces of information that users aren't aware that they'll need. And we frequently hear, well, that's an external site, so there's nothing I can do about it. You can't change that external site, but you can help your users understand what is going to happen when they go to this site and what they're going to need to have in front of them. You're going to need to have your social security number, your driver's license number. In the case of the Real ID, I need to have 15 pieces of flair, is what I call them, when I go to get my driver's license, because I have had a different name in the past. And so I have to have my marriage license and my birth certificate and all of these things. But just letting people know that they need to have those things cuts down considerably on their usability issues, because they're not getting up, going and getting something, coming back. Oh, now I need this. I have to order that one. I can't actually do it right now. Informational tasks are a little bit different. Oftentimes we see that the content is too dense or too long. There's a lot of scrolling and a lot of of long sentences and very dense content that's not quickly skimmable or scannable. So people tend to shut down. They're not here to read a book. They're here to try and get some information quickly. Or the content is written at too complex of a level. We recommend 8th grade level for websites just because it's easy to skim, to read quickly. The navigation structure is difficult to explore. So that information architecture piece that Kirsty talked about earlier is difficult to get through, or search is poorly executed. So even if they can, if they can't navigate, they go and try to search, and search brings up old documents or doesn't search certain types of pages or any number of things that could cause them issues. All right, Kirsty, back to you.
All right. Thank you, Carrie Ann and Melanie. So that was like, we're going to do like 3 little rounds here of how we start to connect the data in these practices. So that was round 1, when we start to think about different types of tasks. And I'm also just going to put a little shout out here that we'll talk again at the end. We're starting from a sort of broad perspective. This is, data that is both very wide and very deep. And if anything here is inspiring to you in the data science world of, I would dig this way or I would dig that way, we have some ways to partner and to use this data to get to the next level. For the purposes of today's webinar, we're starting with this sort of one metric and how we kind of break things out from there. But in the future, I'm sure Harish is going to be back to talk about some of the other ways we slice and dice this information. And we would love to have more collaboration to make the most of what we have available to us. So more on that to come at the end. But for now, let's go to round 2, which is, all right, let's talk about user success again. But when we split it out by the frequency of visit, we again see a little differentiation here where, again, perhaps not surprisingly, first-time users' level of success is at 55%. Infrequent users have a 62% success rate, and frequent users have a 69% rate. And on the one hand, we say, well, yeah, of course, the more you come, the easier it's going to be to do that. That's connected to some of those usability principles that Carrie Ann nodded at when she gave you the sort of quick crash course in usability. But it's problematic for a number of reasons. As Harish spoke to at length in his first webinar in this series, when the first-time user success rate is lagging, it raises questions about how you're ever going to bring additional users into the site, help reach corners of your population and community that are currently underserved. That is a number that's very concerning to us, and we want to look at how usability and accessibility can help us improve it. So I'm going to hand it first to Melanie to talk about how we approach this topic.
Thanks, Kirsty. So with the frequency of visit, when you're unpacking your data around this particular segment, look for perhaps a plateau. So again, if you have a top task, if you have some other area of content on the site that's very popular and is necessary for visitors, does it plateau out with no real gains in frequency of visit? Because if it's easy to do and it's enjoyable, people will keep coming back and more people will keep coming back. But if it's really challenging every time, they're probably going to abandon it after a while. They might try it a few times and then say, oh, this just is too hard. So look for the plateaus. You might also consider task success, right? So people say, sure, I can complete this task, because you're asking them with the Voice of Citizen or other survey tools. But there might be some really low satisfaction scores. Now, Carrie Ann noted not everyone's thrilled to pay their water bill or parking ticket. But if you're seeing that task success is kind of flat and satisfaction scores are kind of low, especially in this segment, then examine the whole process through that accessibility lens and see if there's ways you can shore this up, make it, more effective for everybody. To that point, how much of your audience are you losing at each step of a process? So returning visitors that succeed could be a really small group from all the people that could have succeeded if this task, page, whatever, was designed a little bit more effectively for a broad and diverse audience. And then also examine key abandonment points of the site. Everyone has to exit your site at some time, but if they're exiting on a page that has still more things for them to do or explore or know, then that could be a clue that something is not helpful to them. And again, that accessibility lens could be a great way for you to evaluate that. And as with all projects, you want to test and iterate. Off to Carrie Ann.
Thanks, Melanie. So usability issues by frequency of visit. As Kirsty touched on, that low success rate for first-time users tells us that we're not making our sites learnable. So it's very difficult for people to learn how to do these tasks. Frequent users may find workarounds or use brute force to figure out how to accomplish their tasks, but that first-time user success rate, as Kirsty mentioned, not only for underserved communities can this be a problem, but also it could be a problem for us as the people who are administering this site, because there are a lot of folks who are already not necessarily technology savvy or have issues with these things. They figure they'll try it, they'll do it this way because it's available and it'll be easier for me. And if it's not easier for them that first time, they're going to come right into your office and pay that bill if that's an opportunity. Or they're going to, go to the post office and put a stamp on it and send it in the mail, and that's going to be, more work on your end, more time spent doing things that could easily have been done online. But because that interaction was difficult the first time, folks just won't try it again. Topping out at 69% for frequent visitors also tells us that our transactional tasks are not likely very memorable. That 69% are the people who just are going to do it that way because that's the way they're going to do it and they've figured out how to do it. But it's not memorable if folks are still having those, if that was 30% of users are still having trouble completing them. For informational tasks, this could mean that our information is not very easy to find, and it's causing people to have trouble succeeding at finding the information. Back to you, Kirsty.
All right, thank you. And sorry, shouldn't rest my fingers on the arrow keys.
No worries.
Don trying to zoom along here. But all right, so round 3. One more way that we want to talk about how we unpack that 59% overall average of user success is by device. And this is a biggie, especially for accessibility, but also for usability and the way we live our lives now. And you can see mobile and tablet roughly equal of 56% for mobile, 57% for tablet, but both lagging behind desktop success at 63%. And Melanie's going to talk about why for accessibility in particular, that can be very concerning.
Indeed. So mobile phones have been just excellent for people with disabilities. Mobile phones often have assistive tech built right in that can be customized to suit that user's preferences and needs. So if they can't access your website with their mobile device, then it might be all on you to unpack and correct some of these things. So with mobile accessibility, common issues are that cause people not to be able to complete tasks or struggle or the tappable area size. A lot of people hold their phone in one hand and use their thumb to scroll. If I have a mobility impairment, a tremor in my hand, I may not be able to have that surgical precision that might be necessary for some of these really small menus. So think about that tappable area. You want, of course, all your designs to resize correctly for mobile. So if they view it on a desktop versus on a mobile or tablet, it should be a nice experience no matter. Pinch and zoom need to be enabled, especially because a lot of times if you have a vision impairment, you might just zoom everything bigger and then you can see it just fine, but you need to be able to restore it to its original size to move on. And then ensure that your layout works in any orientation as well. You also want to have easy access to the content. So skip to navigation links are often missing. And that means that, if I'm approaching your site through a screen reader, it will start at the top nav, the global nav, and start telling me what all these are. Well, once I start going deeper into your site, I don't need to hear those again. I know they're there. So I want to skip to the main navigation on a page. So that's often missing. A visible focus state is really helpful. So if I'm navigating your site by a keyboard, I'd like to know where I am. and you can draw big borders around where you are to help people, again, find their way. You want to ensure that your audience can complete and submit forms. A lot of times forms are not designed with accessibility in mind. And simple things that, people just love, video captions. I mean, everyone is listening to videos with silence because they can watch more, and nobody can intrude on them and they don't annoy others. So those captions are great. And alternative text for images, again, a very simple fix to describe to people what is there if they can't see that image readily. Carrie Ann.
Great. Similarly to all of the accessibility issues, which are definitely greater, there are also some usability issues that we can see with mobile devices. It could stem from navigation and wayfinding issues with deep menu structures that don't translate well to mobile. So that hamburger menu that then pops out and pops out and pops out, you've all seen them, can be difficult if those navigation structures are very deep. Those can be difficult on mobile if we don't allow for other ways for people to explore information. Also on mobile phones, PDF files can cause usability issues because separate apps are required to view and to download. Sometimes those PDFs, rather than opening up on a mobile phone, will automatically download, and folks who might not be particularly proficient with their mobile phone might not realize that something has downloaded and may not understand what's happening and why this hasn't opened up when they click on it. And then we'll see when we're viewing that they just keep tapping on it over and over again when it's actually downloaded.
All right. So quickly in the time we have remaining, I want to do two things. And first is I want to talk, well, Carrie Ann and Melanie are going to talk about how we take those suspicions, those issues, those things that we see arising from those user success differentials. How do we actually dig into them? And then I'm going to do a real quick wrap up, and then we'll get into Q&A. So we're almost on target here. Started a couple minutes late. But first, how do we turn that data into action? So we've sort of connected some dots between here's what we see in the chart, here's what bells that's ringing from an accessibility perspective or from a usability perspective. But what do we do then when we suspect something might be off, or how do we dig deeper, or what are the topics that come up again and again? So first I'm going to hand to Melanie to talk about how we investigate accessibility.
Sure. So we have tools that we use, and the first three, Wave, Lighthouse, and Site Improve, those are all checkers that will compare your website page to the WCAG standards. There's A, there's AA, and AAA. The WCAG 2.1 AA standard is the one that's recommended for most websites. So the nice thing about these particular tools is that they will tell you where that error is on the page, why it's important to fix it, and provide additional information. Lighthouse I don't have linked here because that's part of your Chrome browser, which is a nice feature in there. You definitely want to use a color contrast checker because, again, people with vision impairments may not be able to see different colors. So if the text is there and it's too light against a light background or too dark against a dark background, then people won't be able to see it. So these will tell you when there's a problem with the contrast ratios. And then the quick reference guide and the compliance checklist are really handy because, again, if you're not doing this all day, every day, you want to be able to see what can I fix, what's the low-hanging fruit, and what can I, plan for later to have further conversations around. So these tools are great. The technology is improving all the time. However, they still don't catch all of the errors. You might also get some false positives now and again. So 30 to 40%, sometimes 50% is sort of the rate that they are catching these things at. So manual audits are always a great idea and very helpful because you're walking in the shoes of your customers, you're experiencing what they experience using some of the assistive technology that they might be using. Overlay tools are another one they're very popular these days. There's a lot of marketing around them, and it's basically a widget that you can install on your site that offers accessibility, overlays, I guess, things that you can plug in to make your visit there more accessible, but it doesn't solve the underlying issues of your site. and the disability community often finds that overlay tools aren't all that helpful for them. The other issue with the overlays is that when it comes to compliance, you're either compliant or you're not. You're either doing something or you're not. So if you have an overlay tool, but you still haven't addressed the underlying accessibility issues on your site, you may find that you're not in compliance. So these are just, again, things to be considering. So one example here that I thought might be useful for the audience today is PDFs. You know, PDFs are pervasive. Everybody's like, oh, let's turn it into a PDF and put it on the site. So there was this really nice study. It's Improving the Accessibility of Scientific Documents by Wang and others. And they examined, 11,000 plus scientific papers. And I thought scientific papers make a good proxy for the website content, like the water quality report that a government website has to place on their site and so forth. So when they audited scientific papers published during, the 2010 through 2019 against defined accessibility criteria, they had a list of, 5 or so items that they thought were really important. Just 2.4% met the accessibility criteria. So over to the right, I have a chart that shows what the experience of the folks that were testing the content had to go through. And they talked about, it affected the navigation, it affected the readability. They had, I couldn't even open the PDF to no headings. Figures weren't annotated as figures. Images didn't have alternative text for me. The reading order is incorrect. So lots of problems with accessing PDF content, but often that PDF content contains the important stuff, right? So things you can do on your website. If you might get pushback. We need to have these PDFs on our website. Fine. Let's use some data to track the opens and downloads of these documents. You might find that they're not as important as people might think. You can also discern from this, what are our most popular documents, and then remediate or correct those. There are ways you can improve PDFs so that they are accessible. One technique we use is to provide a summary page. So you have the web page. Now it's HTML content, which is very accessible. And you describe a basic overview, a summary of this content, and then link to it. So people that really want to get more content, they can download the PDF then. The other thing is before you create. So PDFs are not born, they're made. So in your original document format, please check for accessible formatting. You can create accessible documents and then convert them into more accessible PDFs. Now, there might be some additional cleanup you need to do. However, it's definitely a step in the right direction to try and ensure that people can access PDF content as well. Over to Carrie Ann.
And Carrie Ann, just in the interest of time, I'm just going to mention that there are lots of tools, and we can even link up some of these tools when we share our follow-up content. I'm just going to pop you right into, if you can quickly summarize this, and we can also write up a little bit more about what we did in this case in our follow-up content so that we can wrap and get to Q&A.
Absolutely. That was where I was going to go with that as well.
Thank you. Sorry.
No worries. So we did a pretty intense user research project for the State of Washington Department of Commerce. We did techniques such as card sorting, usability testing, moderated heat mapping, and tree testing. Card sorting helps people to categorize data so that we know how they're thinking about information, what their mental models are. Heat mapping shows how far they scroll or look down a page and what information they see and don't see. The usability testing, we give them tasks and we can hear from them talking through them how hard it is for them to find information, what their struggles are in completing those tasks. And then tree testing gives them a mock of the navigation and asks them where they would find certain information. And then you see on the right here, it shows us the paths that they used to get to that information. So not only are they getting it where we think they will, but where should we put links to those things for the folks that don't have the same mental model as the others.
So Carrie can share more details of how this all plays out and how it helps us understand
For sure.
improvements we can put in place. Just in a 30-second bite, I just want to sum things up as we open the Q&A. Harish shared this slide in his presentation. We use it all the time. These dots represent all of our sources, essentially, of voice of citizen data. So folks who have taken the survey. But what I really want to emphasize is, to us, these dots are people. They're not just data. They're real people living complex lives with competing priorities and a lot going on. And part of what's frustrating about this map is how many dots are not there. What do we even know about the folks who we haven't yet started to serve, who need to come to these sites in order to do essential things that really would improve their overall quality of life, even in some cases? We know we have some issues going on with things being particularly inaccessible to those first-time users, particularly challenging. So our goal is to continue looking at how we can connect the dots between accessibility, usability, and our data points to make sure we're creating the most inclusive experience for everyone, because ultimately that's really what this is about. We are trying to create experiences that are truly for everyone so that everyone can reap the benefits. And we will put all this information in our follow-up materials as well. But if any of this piques your interest and you're interested in getting involved and you're thinking, I would want to look at how we slice and dice that data in different ways, we would love to hear from you. So without further ado, let's get to the Q&A.
Excellent. Thanks so much, all of you. That was a great presentation. Hopefully folks had some pretty significant takeaways. And we are delighted to open up the forum for questions via our Easy Retro board form. These are just a few questions we've populated the board with to get things started. Feel free to use the plus sign at the top of each column underneath the headings Voice of Citizen Data, accessibility, usability. You can see that you can easily enter your own comment or question and click save in the lower right-hand corner. You can also upvote your friends and colleagues on the webinar who have already added comments and some of these pre-populated questions here as well. If any of these ring true with you, feel free to upvote those or add comments about how maybe making these things a little bit more personal for your organization. We welcome those as well. So without any further delay, I'm going to go ahead and also say, we prefer you to use this Easy Retro form, but we also welcome you to just unmute and use your voice and ask a question if that is how you prefer to interact with our speakers today. So feel free to do that as well.
All right, and while folks mull, we've got one upvote here, so I'm going to say, Melanie, can you jump in on this question of which images should have alternative text and how you write it?
All images should have alternative text. And the way I describe alternative text for images is that, let's say you're at home watching a program and this adorable commercial comes on TV. It's got a basket of puppies with babies. So your friend's in another room working on something and you're like, hey, you got to come see this. So you're shouting across the room and they're like, what is it? And you're like, you don't have time to explain the whole thing. So you say, it's a basket of puppies with some babies. And they're like, oh, I got to see that. So that's what alternative text is. It's a short, succinct description of what that image contains. Now, if there is an image that is purely decorative, you can also tag that with quotations, just quotation, no space, another quotation. And then that will identify to screen readers that this is just a decorative use image. But if you have them properly tagged, it makes for a much more enjoyable experience for people to interact with your content.
All right. Any other questions that folks would like us to address? Clearly, we gave you all you need to now go get a certification in digital accessibility and usability.
Yes, all of your jobs are at risk right now. Thanks, presenting.
Plenty of room. budget.
I will say the question under usability that I did not upvote, the difference between being useful and usable, that is a really, I love that gray area. Or is it even a gray area? Talk to us a little bit more about that, please.
Sure, it is a little bit of a gray area, but the way that I like to think of it is something can be useful and not usable. So we'll use the example of the water bill that we've been using all along. It is very useful to me that I can pay my water bill online and I don't have to mail in a check, and I don't have to go to the city to be able to do that. However, it can be a very non-usable experience when I go to the payment portal to pay that water bill online. That's not necessarily a usable experience. Just a mobile phone in general or any tool, it's very useful that I have a phone or the internet in the palm of my hand. But there are a lot of applications that are not necessarily very usable that are on that could be very useful if they were more usable. So they go hand in hand, but they are a different thing.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Carrie. And I saw the question in the chat around the breakdown between mobile versus tablet versus desktop. I should have left that at my fingertips. I don't have it. It's in Harisha's original presentation. We like to think of it as roughly a 50-50 split. It goes up and down a little. COVID caused desktop usage to go up and surpass mobile for a little brief minute. Tablet consistently 2 to 3%. So there are a few folks, and you wonder, there's an age in tablet correspondence. Definitely some older folks find that a much easier experience, but we like to think of it as that 50-50 split with a definite momentum towards it becoming the majority. And sometimes our numbers vary a little bit compared to Google Analytics. We always try to look at both when we're analyzing a site or other analytics that they can collect. Our survey somehow does seem to attract more mobile users sometimes because it kind of takes over your whole screen when it pops up before you dismiss it. So we keep that in mind when we're looking at that. But the 50-50 split is compelling for clients because it kind of shakes them. Like the trend is heading towards mobile. You have to wake up to this now. It's not too late, but we need to prepare a different way of thinking about your content.
All right. So just in the interest of time, we've gotten a lot of very kind comments and notes of thanks in the chat. So those are going directly to me, but I will pass that praise on to you guys and say thank you so much for an amazing hour together. It's been so informative and I think just also like really easy to process. And I appreciate that you guys put this in language that I can understand, which is always
There's the goal in a nutshell.
Yes, exactly. But we do want to say thank you all for joining us today. Do take a moment to complete the evaluation because we are eager to continue to bring these types of webinars to you and to really make this information as accessible as possible and kind of build on this amazing work that IF is creating. Definitely check out their website as well. We can include ways to contact Kirsty and the other team members, both Melanie and Carrie Ann, in our wrap-up materials. But thanks so much, folks. We do also encourage you to join us next Tuesday. Spend your Valentine's Day learning all about the 5 ways data visualizations can mislead and how to fix them. There are obviously more than 5 ways, but we have really enjoyed learning from Danielle Schaefer, the professor at UNC, and we look forward to sharing her work with you here next week. And then, of course, check out information about Data Matters at datamatters.org. All right, and with that, I will leave you all. Hope you all enjoy the rest of your week wherever you are, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.